The space station known as Concordance Prime floated in the darkness between three great empires. And on this day, it held more tension than the vacuum of space itself could contain Sergeant Kang. Tae-Young stood near the back of the Grand Assembly Hall with his hands clasped behind his back and his eyes scanning every corner of the massive chamber. He was one of only 12 humans present at this historic summit, and the other species made sure to remind them of that fact with every dismissive glance and whispered comment. Valorian delegates sat on elevated platforms draped in silver and violet fabric, their tall, elegant forms moving with a grace that made humans look clumsy by comparison. Their pale blue skin seemed to glow under the chamber lights, and their large, dark eyes held centuries of superiority in every gaze. Across from them sat the Threscan collective representatives, their reptilian features sharp and aggressive, their scaled bodies armored even in this place of supposed peace. The two empires had been at the edge of war for decades, and this summit was meant to prevent the bloodshed that everyone feared was coming. Tae-Young did not care much for politics. He was a soldier, a protector, and his job was simple: watch for danger and respond to it before anyone got hurt. The humans seem nervous, a melodic voice said from somewhere to his right. He turned his head slightly and found himself looking at Princess Alindra Velsora, daughter of the Valorian Emperor himself. She stood apart from her guards, studying him with genuine curiosity rather than the disgust he had grown accustomed to receiving. Not nervous, Your Highness. Tae-Young replied with a respectful nod. Just alert. There are many people here who would benefit from chaos today. The princess tilted her head, her silver hair cascading over one shoulder like liquid moonlight. She was beautiful in the way that stars were beautiful, distant, radiant, and completely beyond reach. You speak directly, she observed. Most beings stumble over their words when addressing royalty, yet you do not. Is this a human trait or simply your own nature? Perhaps both, Your Highness. She smiled at that, a small expression that softened her regal features. For a moment, she looked less like a princess and more like a young woman curious about the galaxy around her. I have read about your species, she continued. They call you Deathworlders, survivors of a planet that should have killed you 1,000 times over. Your kind evolved, alongside predators and poisons and disasters that would have ended most civilizations before they began. Earth was not kind to us, Tae-Young admitted, but it made us strong. We learned to adapt, to endure, to protect each other against impossible odds. To protect each other. Alindra repeated thoughtfully. That is an interesting priority. Among my people, protection is reserved for those who have earned it through blood or bond. Before Tae-Young could respond, a chime echoed through the chamber, and the princess was called back to her delegation. She offered him one last curious glance before gliding away, her guards closing around her like a living shield. Tae-Young returned to his observation, but something felt wrong. The air itself seemed to hum with a tension that had nothing to do with politics. He scanned the crowd again, his trained eyes moving from face to face, searching for anything out of place. The Valorians stood proud and composed, the Threscans coiled and watchful, the dozens of other species milling about in their designated areas. Then he saw it, a servant near the central platform moving with purpose that did not match the casual pace of those around him. His hands were empty, but his eyes kept darting toward the Valorian delegation with an intensity that screamed of ill intent. Tae-Young began moving before his conscious mind had fully processed the threat. He pushed through the crowd with the urgency of a man who had seen death before and knew exactly what it looked like when it was. Approaching, the servant reached into his robes and pulled out a device that pulsed with sickly green light. It was small enough to fit in his palm, but Tae-Young recognized the energy signature from his military training, a compression charge. capable of vaporizing everything within 20 meters time, seemed to slow as Dae-Jung calculated distances and angles. He would never reach the assassin in time to stop the detonation, but he could reach someone else. Princess Alendra stood directly in the blast radius. Her attention focused on the central podium where the peace treaty was about to be signed. She had no idea that death was mere seconds away. Dae-Jung did not think about consequences or rewards, or what anyone would say about a human interfering in alien affairs. He simply moved, his legs carrying him faster than he had ever run in his entire life. The assassin pressed the activation switch just as Dae-Jung reached the princess. He wrapped his arms around her and twisted his body to place himself between her and the source of the explosion. For one heartbeat, he saw her eyes widen with shock and confusion. Then the world became fire and pain and a roaring sound that swallowed everything else. Dae-Jung felt the blast tear into his back like 1,000 burning knives. Felt his body absorb an impact that should have killed him instantly. He held on to the princess, even as his vision began to fade. Even as his strength left him and his legs gave out beneath him. He had done what he was trained to do, what his instincts demanded, what his humanity required of him. He had protected someone who needed protecting. And that was enough. The last thing he heard before the darkness claimed him was Princess Alendra calling out in a voice filled with fear and wonder, asking why a stranger would give his life for hers. Then there was nothing but silence and the cold embrace of unconsciousness. Pain was the first thing that greeted Kang Dae-Jung when consciousness finally returned to him. It radiated from his back in waves of fire that pulsed with every heartbeat. And for a long moment, he could not remember why he hurt so badly. Then the memories came flooding back. The assassin, the explosion, the princess in his arms as the blast tore through the assembly hall. He tried to move and discovered that his wrists and ankles were bound to whatever surface he was lying on. Cold metal restraints held him firmly in place. And when he opened his eyes, he found himself staring at an unfamiliar ceiling bathed in soft blue light. The creature is awake. A harsh voice announced from somewhere beyond his field of vision. Dae-Jung turned his head and saw that he was in some kind of medical chamber. Strange devices hummed around him, projecting beams of light across his body that he assumed were meant to heal his wounds. But it was the soldiers that captured his attention. 6 Valorian royal guards stood in a semicircle around his bed, their elegant faces twisted with suspicion and barely contained hostility. Each one carried a weapon that looked powerful enough to vaporize him where he lay. "Where am I?" Dae-Jung asked, his voice rough from disuse. "You are aboard the Imperial warship Valkyran," a new voice responded, deeper and more commanding than the first. "And you will answer our questions." "Human," a 7th Valorian stepped forward, and Dae-Jung immediately recognized the bearing of a senior officer. This one was older than the guards, his pale blue skin marked with silver lines that indicated decades of service to the Empire. "I am Commander Theron Velkan," the officer declared, "head of security for Princess Alendra. You will explain to me exactly why you attacked her during the summit." Dae-Jung blinked in confusion. "Attacked her? I did not attack the princess," he said carefully. "I protected her from an explosion. There was an assassin with a compression charge, and I placed myself between her and the blast." Commander Theron's expression did not change. His dark eyes remained cold and calculating as he studied the human before him. "A convenient story," he replied, "but one that raises more questions than it answers. Why would a human, a species barely tolerated in civilized space, risk his life for Valorian royalty? Because she was in danger and I could help. Where I come from, that is reason enough." The commander made a sound of disbelief and turned to one of his subordinates. They exchanged words in rapid Valorian that Dae-Jung could not follow, their tones sharp with disagreement. "Your injuries should have killed you. Commander Thyron said finally. Turning back to face him, the compression blast struck your back with enough force to destroy a standard transport vehicle. Our medical officers have never seen anything survive such trauma. Humans are harder to kill than most species realize, so it would seem, the commander acknowledged with obvious reluctance. The princess survived with only minor injuries because your body absorbed the majority of the blast. Our physicians say this should not be possible, yet here you are, alive and recovering at a rate that defies their understanding. Dae-young said nothing. He knew that human durability was unusual by galactic standards, but he had never expected it to become relevant in quite this way. The Emperor has ordered you kept alive until we can determine the truth of what happened. Commander Thyron continued. But make no mistake, if we discover that you were part of the assassination plot, your death will be neither quick nor merciful. I was not part of any plot, Dae-young insisted. I am a security contractor attached to the human delegation. I noticed the assassin moments before he detonated his device, and I acted on instinct to save the nearest person in danger. And that person just happened to be the heir to the Valorian Empire. I did not know who she was when I moved. I only knew that she would die if I did not act. Commander Thyron studied him for a long moment, and something in his expression shifted, not quite belief, but perhaps the beginning of doubt about his initial assumptions. You expect me to accept that a human would sacrifice himself for a complete stranger with no promise of reward or recognition. I expect nothing, Dae-young replied honestly, but that is the truth. My people have always protected those who cannot protect themselves, and we do not require a reason beyond the knowledge that it is the right thing to do. The commander opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, the door to the medical chamber slid open with a soft hiss. Every guard in the room immediately snapped to attention, their weapons lowering in deference to whoever had just entered. Dae-young could not see past the wall of soldiers, but he heard footsteps approaching, light and graceful. Moving with a rhythm he somehow recognized, the guards parted, and Princess Alindra Velsora stepped into view. Her silver hair was pulled back from her face, and a small bandage on her temple was the only visible sign that she had been anywhere near an explosion. Her dark eyes met his, and in them Dae-young saw something he had not expected: gratitude, curiosity, and perhaps even a hint of wonder. Leave us, she commanded without looking away from him. Commander Thyron stepped forward with obvious concern. Your Highness, this human has not been cleared of suspicion. It is not safe for you to be alone with. I said leave us, Commander, Alindra repeated, a voice carrying the weight of absolute royal authority. That was not a request. The commander hesitated for only a moment before bowing his head in submission. He gestured to his guards, and they filed out of the chamber one by one, leaving the princess alone with the human who had nearly died to save her life. The door closed behind them, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. Then Alindra stepped closer to his bed, her expression softening as she looked down at the man who had given everything to protect her. Why? She asked simply. Princess Alindra stood beside the medical bed, where Kang Dae-young lay restrained, her question hanging in the air between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Why? It was such a simple word, yet it carried the weight of everything she could not understand about this strange human who had thrown himself into death's embrace for her sake. I am not sure how to answer that question, Your Highness, Dae-young admitted, because to me, there was never any other choice. I saw danger approaching you, and I responded the only way I knew how. But you did not know me. Alindra pressed, her voice soft with confusion. We had spoken for mere moments before the attack. I was nothing to you, a stranger from a species that treats your kind with contempt. That does not matter. How can it not matter? Dae-young was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. He wished he could sit up and face her properly, but the restraints held him firmly in place. Among my people, he began slowly, there is a belief that every life has value, regardless of who that life belongs to. When someone is in danger and you have the power to help them, you help them, not because you expect something in return, but because failing to act would make you less than what you should be. Alendra listened intently, her dark eyes searching his face for any sign of deception. She found none. This is a human philosophy? It is more than philosophy. It is instinct. We evolved on a world that tried to kill us every single day, and we survived because we learned to protect each other. That protection was never limited to family or friends or those who could repay the debt. The princess moved to a nearby chair and sat down, her posture still regal, but somehow less distant than before. She was trying to understand him. Dae-young realized, truly trying in a way that most aliens never bothered to do. Among the Valorians, she said quietly, protection is sacred. It is offered only to those bound by blood or those who have sworn formal oaths of service. The idea of protecting a stranger without expectation of return is considered foolish at best, as suspicious at worst. Then I suppose your people think I am very foolish. A ghost of a smile crossed her lips. Commander Thyron certainly does. He believes you were part of the assassination plot, and that your apparent heroism was merely a cover for some deeper conspiracy. And what do you believe, Your Highness? Alendra met his gaze directly. I believe that I watched a man throw himself between me and certain death without a single moment of hesitation. I believe that I felt his arms around me as the explosion struck. And I believe that I am alive right now, only because his body absorbed the blast that was meant to kill me. She paused. And when she spoke again, her voice carried a weight of emotion that surprised them both. I believe that you saved my life, Sergeant Kang Dae-young, and I will not allow you to be punished for it. Your Highness, my father has requested a full report on the incident. She interrupted, rising from her chair with renewed purpose, and I intend to give him one. The evidence supports your innocence, and my testimony will confirm what I witnessed with my own eyes. She moved toward the door, but paused before opening it. There is one more thing you should know. Our investigators have identified the assassin. He was a Threscan extremist who opposed the peace treaty and hoped to reignite the war between our peoples by killing me. Then the evidence will prove that I had no connection to him. It already has, Alendra confirmed. But evidence alone may not be enough to overcome the prejudice that many in my father's court hold against humans. That is why I will speak for you personally. She pressed a control beside the door, and it slid open to reveal Commander Theron waiting in the corridor beyond. His expression was unreadable, but his posture was stiff with barely contained disapproval. Arrange a secure channel to my father, the princess commanded. I wish to deliver my report immediately. Your Highness, would it not be wiser to wait until we have completed our investigation? The investigation has completed, Commander. The human is innocent, and I will not allow him to remain in restraints a moment longer than necessary. Commander Theron's jaw tightened, but he bowed his head in acceptance. As you command, Your Highness. The channel will be ready within the hour. Alendra turned back to Dae-young one final time. I do not know what fate awaits you after this, Sergeant. My father is a fair ruler, but he is also cautious, and humans remain an unknown quantity in his eyes. I understand, Your Highness. No, she said softly. I do not think you do. What you did today was not just an act of protection. It was a statement about your entire species. Whether you intended it or not, you have shown the Valorian Empire that humans are capable of selfless courage. And that is something that cannot be ignored. She left without another word. And Dae-young was alone with the hum of the medical equipment and the weight of everything she had said an hour later. Commander Thyron returned to inform him that the restraints would be removed. The princess had delivered her testimony to the Emperor, and the evidence had confirmed her account beyond any reasonable doubt. You are no longer considered a suspect, the commander said, his tone suggesting that he still harbored personal doubts. But you are not free to leave. The Emperor has summoned you to the throne world to stand before him directly. What does he want from me? Commander Theron's expression shifted, and for the first time, Dae Young saw something other than suspicion in his eyes, something that might have been reluctant respect. He wants to understand, the commander replied. And I confess that I share his curiosity. I have reviewed the security footage from the summit hall 100 times now, and I still cannot comprehend why you did what you did. I have already explained. Yes, you have, Theron interrupted, and your explanation makes no sense to me. But I am beginning to suspect that this says more about the limitations of Valorian thinking than it does about human motivations. He reached down and began releasing the restraints that held Dae Young to the bed. The princess has requested that you be treated as an honored guest for the remainder of the journey. I have assigned quarters for you on the upper deck. Dae Young sat up slowly, wincing as the movement pulled at the healing wounds on his back. The Valorian medicine had done remarkable work, but some pain remained. Thank you, Commander. Do not thank me yet, human. The Emperor's judgment is not guaranteed to be merciful, and there are many in his court who would see you imprisoned regardless of the evidence. Then I will have to hope that the truth is enough to convince them. Commander Theron studied him for a long moment, then shook his head with something that almost resembled wonder. You humans truly are a strange species, he murmured, and then he turned and walked away. The imperial palace of the Valorian Empire rose from the surface of the throne world, like a monument to 10,000 years of civilization. Its towers reached toward the violet sky, and its walls gleamed with metals that humans had not yet learned to name. Kang Dae Young walked through corridors that made him feel impossibly small, his footsteps echoing against floors of polished crystal. Commander Theron walked beside him, along with a full escort of royal guards, whose presence reminded everyone that the human was not entirely trusted. You will address the Emperor as your Imperial Majesty when you first speak to him, Theron instructed. After that, you may use Majesty alone. Do not speak unless spoken to, do not make sudden movements, and do not, under any circumstances, approach the throne without explicit permission. I understand. I hope you do, the commander replied grimly, because the court will be watching your every action for any sign of disrespect or threat. There are nobles who have already made up their minds about your guilt, and they will use any excuse to demand your imprisonment. The great doors of the throne chamber loomed before them, carved with scenes from Valorian history that stretched back further than human civilization had existed. Two guards in ceremonial armor pulled them open, and Dae Young stepped into the heart of an alien empire. The chamber was vast beyond anything he had ever seen. Hundreds of Valorian nobles stood in tiered galleries along the walls, their pale blue faces turned toward him with expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. The air itself seemed to vibrate with power and ancient tradition at the far end of the chamber. Upon a throne carved from a single piece of luminescent crystal sat Emperor Calith Valsareh, was old by Valorian standards, his silver hair almost white and his features lined with the weight of centuries. But his eyes were sharp and cold, and when they fell upon Dae Young, the human felt as though every secret he had ever held was being examined. And cataloged Princess Alindra stood at her father's right hand, her expression carefully neutral. She did not acknowledge Dae Young directly, but he saw her slight nod when their eyes met for the briefest of moments. Approach, the Emperor commanded, his voice carrying effortlessly across the enormous chamber. Dae Young walked forward until he stood at the base of the steps leading to the throne. Then he stopped and bowed deeply in the human fashion. Your Imperial Majesty. The Emperor studied him in silence for a long moment, and the entire court seemed to hold its breath. You are the human who claims to have saved my daughter's life. I do not claim it. Majesty, Daeyoung replied steadily. I simply did what was necessary when I saw that she was in danger. A murmur rippled through the assembled nobles. Some seemed offended by his directness, while others appeared intrigued. The evidence supports your account, the emperor acknowledged. The assassin has been identified as a Threscan extremist, and you had no connection to him or his organization. Furthermore, my daughter has testified that your actions were those of a protector, not a conspirator. Your Majesty, a voice called from one of the galleries. May I speak? The emperor inclined his head, and a noble in elaborate robes stepped forward. His expression was one of thinly veiled contempt. Even if this human acted as he claims, we must consider the implications of allowing such behavior to go unrewarded or unpunished. He placed his hands upon the princess without permission, an act that would be considered a grave offense if committed by any Valorian citizen. He placed his hands upon me to save my life, Alendra interjected, her voice cutting through the chamber like a blade. Would you have preferred that he observe proper protocol while I was vaporized by the explosion? The noble flushed but did not back down. I am simply noting that we cannot establish a precedent where aliens are permitted to touch members of the imperial family, regardless of their stated intentions. Enough, the emperor said, and the chamber fell silent immediately. He turned his attention back to Daeyoung, his ancient eyes boring into the human with unsettling intensity. I have one question for you, human, and I expect an honest answer. Why did you protect my daughter? What did you hope to gain? Daeyoung had known this question would come. He had thought about his answer during the entire journey to the throne world, and he had decided that only the truth would serve him now. I hope to gain nothing. Majesty, explain. Among my people, protection is not a transaction. We do not calculate the value of a life before deciding whether to save it. Your daughter was in danger, and I had the ability to shield her from harm. That was all the reason I needed. You expected to die. Yes, Majesty. When I placed myself between the princess and the explosion, I fully believed that I would not survive. And yet you did it anyway, for a stranger. For someone who belonged to a species that treats humans as barely more than animals. Yes, Majesty. The emperor leaned forward on his throne, and for a moment his cold expression cracked to reveal something that might have been genuine curiosity. I have ruled this empire for 400 years, and in that time I have learned to recognize lies and manipulation in all their forms. I see none of that in you, only a simple, incomprehensible sincerity that I cannot explain. He straightened and addressed the chamber at large. Commander Thyron stepped forward. The commander moved to stand beside Daeyoung, his expression unreadable. You are the head of my daughter's security. You have reviewed the evidence and interviewed this human personally. What is your judgment? Thyron was silent for a moment, and Daeyoung could feel the weight of the entire court pressing down upon them both. When I first questioned the human, Thyron began slowly. I was certain he was part of the conspiracy. His story made no sense to me, and I could not imagine any being acting as he claimed to have acted. He paused, and when he continued his voice was stronger. But I have watched the security footage many times now, and I have seen what this human did. He moved to protect the princess before any of my guards, including myself, had even registered the threat. He did not hesitate, did not calculate, did not consider his own survival. Thyron turned to face Daeyoung directly. He acted as a true guardian should act, and he did so without any of the training or conditioning that we provide to our own protectors. I do not fully understand why he did it, but I can no longer deny that he did. The commander turned back to the emperor and bowed. My judgment, Majesty, is that this human is innocent of any wrongdoing, and that his actions saved the life of Princess Alendra. I recommend that he be released with the gratitude of the Empire. Another murmur swept through the court, and this time There was more surprise than hostility in the sound. The Emperor nodded slowly. Your recommendation is noted, Commander. However, I believe that simple release is insufficient to address what has occurred here today. He rose from his throne, and every being in the chamber bowed in response. Bring me the scroll of Vel-Sharan. A ripple of shock spread through the imperial court as the Emperor's words echoed off the ancient walls. Whispers erupted among the noble galleries, and even Commander Theron's carefully controlled expression faltered for a moment. The scroll of Vel-Sharan. Someone gasped. But that title has not been granted in over 2,000 years. Princess Alindra's eyes widened, but she remained silent as a servant approached the throne carrying an ornate case of silver and crystal. Inside lay a scroll of material that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. The Emperor took the scroll and descended the steps until he stood directly before Kang De-Yung. Up close, the ancient ruler was even more imposing, his presence carrying the weight of centuries of absolute power. Do you know what this is, human? I do not, Majesty. The Vel-Sharan is the highest honor that can be bestowed upon a protector in our empire, the Emperor explained, his voice carrying to every corner of the silent chamber. It designates the bearer as a sacred guardian of the imperial bloodline, one whose courage and selflessness have been proven beyond all doubt. He unrolled the scroll, revealing text written in flowing Valorian script that glowed faintly against the pale material. In 10,000 years of our civilization, this title has been granted only a handful of times. It has never been offered to anyone outside our species. De-Yung felt the weight of every gaze in the chamber, pressing down upon him. He understood now why the court had reacted with such shock. Majesty, he said carefully, I am honored by your consideration, but I am just a soldier. I am not qualified to hold such a sacred position in your empire. You are wrong, the Emperor replied. You are exactly qualified, because you have already demonstrated the qualities that the Vel-Sharan represents. You did not protect my daughter because of duty or obligation or expectation of reward. You protected her because it was simply what you believed was right. He stepped closer, and his ancient eyes softened almost imperceptibly. That is rarer than you can possibly understand. In all my centuries of rule, I have seen countless beings claim to be selfless and honorable, but their actions always revealed ulterior motives, political advantage, personal gain, fear of punishment. You had none of these, and yet you still gave your life for a stranger. I survived. Majesty, by chance alone, the Emperor countered. And that survival does not diminish what you were willing to sacrifice, Princess. Alindra descended from her place beside the throne and came to stand next to her father. Her dark eyes met De-Yung's with an intensity that made his breath catch in his chest. If you accept this honor, she said softly, you will become a formal protector of the imperial family. You will serve as a bridge between our peoples and a symbol of what humans are capable of achieving. Your Highness, I am not a diplomat or a symbol. I am not a diplomat or a symbol. I am a soldier who did what any decent person should have done. That is precisely why you must accept, Alindra replied. Because you do not see yourself as special. And yet your actions have shown an entire galaxy that humans are more than the primitive Deathworlders we believed you to be. She reached out and touched his hand, a gesture that made several nobles gasp in shock. You opened the door today, Sergeant Kang De-Yung. Walking through it is your choice, but know that if you do, you will change the fate of your entire species. De-Yung looked from the princess to the Emperor to the scroll that glowed with ancient power. He thought about his home, about Earth, about all the humans who had been dismissed and overlooked by the greater galactic community. He thought about what it would mean if he could change that, not through war or conquest, but through the simple act of accepting an honor that had been earned. Through selfless courage, I accept, he said. The Emperor smiled, a rare expression that transformed his stern features into something almost warm. Then Neil Kang De-Jung of Earth, and received the blessing of the Velsharan. De-Jung lowered himself to one knee, and the Emperor pressed the glowing scroll against his shoulder. Warmth spread through his body as the ancient Valorian words were spoken over him, binding him to a tradition that stretched back thousands of years. When he rose, he was no longer a simple soldier. He was a guardian of the Valorian Empire, the first human to ever hold such an honor. The court erupted into a mixture of applause and stunned silence. Some nobles cheered while others stood frozen with disbelief. But none could deny what they had witnessed. Commander Thyron approached and extended his hand in the human fashion, a gesture he must have researched specifically for this moment. "Welcome, Velsharan," he said. "I look forward to serving alongside you." De-Jung clasped the commander's hand and nodded. "I look forward to earning that privilege, Commander." The ceremony that followed was broadcast across the entire galaxy. Billions of beings watched as a human stood among Valorian royalty, wearing the sacred symbols of the Velsharan and receiving the formal recognition of one of the most powerful empires in known space. In the days that followed, everything changed. Human delegations were suddenly welcomed where they had previously been ignored. Trade negotiations that had stalled for years were reopened. Young Valorians began seeking out humans to learn about their strange philosophy of unconditional protection. And on the throne world, Sergeant Kang De-Jung took his place at Princess Alindra's side, not as a servant or a subordinate, but as a guardian whose courage had earned him a position of honor. Months later, as they stood together on a balcony overlooking the capital city, Alindra asked him the same question she had asked when they first spoke after the explosion. "Why did you do it, really?" De-Jung smiled and looked out at the alien stars that had once seemed so hostile and distant. "Because someone had to," he replied simply. "And humans have always been good at standing in the way of danger for others. It is not something we choose. It is something we are." Alindra leaned against the railing beside him, her silver hair catching the light of the twin moons. "Your people truly are remarkable." "No," De-Jung said softly. "We are just human. Everything else follows from that." And across the galaxy, slowly but surely, other species began to understand what those words truly meant, that humanity's greatest strength was not their resilience or their adaptability or their stubborn refusal to die. It was their capacity to care for others, even strangers, even enemies, even those who had done nothing to deserve such compassion. That was what made them human, and that was what would one day make them legends.